Tonight, I would like to look at a very beautiful piece that was written by the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes was a 19th century Hasidic rabbi, the rabbi of the Ger Hasidic sect. Today, one of the largest Hasidic sects in the world, if not the largest. The Sfas Emes was the third of the Ger rabbis, and certainly the most influential. His writings are still widely read today by Hasidim and non-Hasidim alike. What separates him from some of the other Hasidic writings is, first of all, he does have a slightly more analytic approach. So sometimes Hasidic works get really flowy and ambiguous and very hard for a layman to understand. But the Sfas Emes, although he is terse, his writing style is pretty short. He explains things with a level of clarity that is really quite amazing. And also, because he writes relatively shortly, you have the ability to kind of add on your own ideas. And so what I want to look at is a deceptively small piece by the Sfas Emes, and we're going to add a little bit of our own juice to it. So let's go for it. This is our first in a series of 3 talks on what the concept of freedom actually is. So I hope you enjoy. Let's go for it. Sfas Emes, Pesach, 5633. Who's a good maths person? If right now we're in 5784, what calendar year was 5633? Who's a quick? 1873. Great, I'll take your word for it. Anyone want to fact check that? All right. We're going to read it in English, although I provided the Hebrew in case anybody would like to follow in the Hebrew. Lechem oni. What is lechem oni?
Bread for the poor.
What's the bread of affliction? What are we talking about?
Matzah.
Matzah! That's right, bread of affliction. Lechem oni. Lechem oni. So oni can mean lots of things. It can mean affliction or poor, like ani, right? To be me'aneh, a person is to afflict oneself. So lots of different descriptions of what lechem oni means. But it could just mean a poor bread. In other words, a bread that has nothing in it. Right? So it's not necessarily a poor person's bread. It's not necessarily a bread of affliction. It could just be a poor bread. The scholars disagree. By the way, I highly recommend, instead of using Google Translate, just throw a Hebrew text into ChatGPT, and it does a far better job, usually, of translating Hebrew. Sometimes it over-interprets wrongly, but it usually flows a lot better. It's amazing. Scholars disagree whether it symbolizes exile and suffering, in other words, the bread of affliction, or freedom. Freedom. Anyone ever heard an idea that matzah itself symbolizes freedom? Where would we see that? Yeah.
Well, maybe it's the first food that they ate as when they were free.
It's what they were eating as they were leaving. Good. According to Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the 11th century scholar, and Ramban, the 14th century scholar, I think, it seems to symbolize suffering. So what the Ramban says is that the reason why we eat matzah is because that's what our ancestors ate in Egypt. In fact, that's word for word what we say when we start the Seder. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt, not what they ate as they were leaving Egypt. So Nachmanides, the Ramban, says that matzah is the perfect food to give to slaves. It's very cheap to make, and it stays in your stomach for a long time, as we all know, the day after the Seder. So the Ramban suggests that matzah represents slavery. It represents our affliction. It was literally slave bread. However, the Maharal of Prague was not satisfied with this explanation, and as Ferdinand said, it was the bread that we ate as we were leaving Egypt. So how could that be the symbol of our slavery? It must be the symbol of our freedom. And the Maharal of Prague elaborates on this a little bit, and he says that really what freedom is simplicity. He says that matzah is the bread of freedom because it's not bound by additives, by any extraneous things. It's also not bound by time. It's quicker than time. That's why it has to be baked in such a short amount of time. It's not being held down by the heaviness and thickness of physicality. It is quick, clean, simple bread. And so simplicity, according to the Maharal of Prague, represents freedom, right? Freedom from any baggage, so to speak. So which one's right? Which one's right? That's what the Sfas Emes wants to know. And what the Sfas Emes is going to do is he's going to say, well, far be it from me from deciding who's right amongst these incredible spiritual, scholarly giants of Torah knowledge. Rashi, Ramban, Maharal, these people were incredible masters of what they knew. So the Sfas Emes is going to say, I think they're both right. So how are they both right? That's what we're going to try to figure out tonight. The truth seems to be that it symbolizes both the descent to Egypt and the redemption. Okay. So it's going to be both the slavery as well as the leaving. How so? Because surely we should praise even the exile. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let me just read one more line. For if not, what praise is there for the redemption if we could draw near to God without it? One of the most inconvenient questions that you can ask about Pesach is that as we're spending so much of the night thanking God for taking us out of Egypt, we have to ask the question, well, who put us in there in the first place? God. Right? He told Abraham, he said, your descendants are going to be slaves. They're going to be slaves in Egypt. So what's going on? I think a lot of people are bothered by this question, whether they know it or not, but it's like, it's one of these things where we're not entirely sure what was the cause of the slavery, what was the function of the slavery, because you have to say that there was a purpose to all that suffering. Because otherwise, why would God do it? Just to be the hero at the end of the day? I think there was some children's movie about a guy who invents a villain so that he can be the hero. Is that what we're talking about here? Megamind. That's the one. I saw that a long time ago, so I didn't remember it. Definitely an underrated animated film. But like, yeah, what's going on? So any suggestions here? Like, how do we get out of this conundrum?
You can't appreciate not being in Egypt unless you have been.
Okay, fine. So the simple answer could be that you have to know what it's like to be a slave so that you can really, truly appreciate freedom. Although that seems still kind of mean, you know? Somebody said to me once, like, I want to like put my kids in public school so that they know what it's like to suffer, so that they know. It's like, really? That's how you're going to treat your children? I mean, that just seems to be a little bit, okay, I understand that you want to ground them and you don't want to spoil them and you certainly want to give them experience where they can learn to be independent, but to intentionally put somebody or even a group of people through such unbelievable suffering so you can say, see, it doesn't feel good on the other side, that's pretty intense, man. I knew I don't know if I told this story before, but I knew we had a student a long time ago who lived in Chicago, and I said, wow, it must stink out there. Like, it is so cold. And she said, no, I love living in Chicago. It makes the coffees taste much better. And I thought, wow, first of all, that's an amazing perspective. Yeah. That's really incredible. But, she's probably not wrong. I'm sure the coffees do taste much better. But I still wouldn't want to live in Chicago. I don't know. All right, any other thoughts? how do we redeem the exile? How do we redeem the slavery and the suffering? Cain, you had your shot. I'll give you a shot in a second. Yeah.
So maybe because the Jewish people are supposed to be like a light in the world, and when a light shines its brightest is when it's gone through the darkness. And so maybe because we understand the Jewish people, we've gone through that, we can really shine our light.
Okay. Okay. So, how is that different from Cain's answer? Like, is it a contrast type of thing, or is it we really know who you can
yeah, maybe
kind of,
because we really sympathize with, we understand.
we can understand other people's plight.
People. Oh,
Okay.
right.
It certainly has done something to the character of the Jewish people that we've gone through slavery. It is definitely a fundamental part of our nation's psyche. And I guess the question is, well, what? What does it do exactly? Any other thoughts? Before we call in Cain again, anyone else want to give it a shot? Yeah.
I think the whole Pesach episode, it relates to many different Chagim, not just Pesach. You've got Sukkot in there, you've got Shavuot in there. So it's not just one sole lesson that it's teaching. It's across many different Chagim that the story pertains to.
Every holiday we have in the Jewish calendar is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, right? A remembrance to the exodus from Egypt. Shavuos, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbos, everything is... and the Shema, we remember the leaving from Egypt. Okay, fine, good. So we know that it is an integral part of what it means to be a Jew. But why? What did it do to us?
It created us as a nation.
It definitely did. But why did we have to be created that way?
Just maybe another quick thought.
Yeah.
Because we went through one of the kind of worst things that people can go through in slavery. We also got, again, there's that kind of reward thing, but the reward of receiving very soon after the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. Okay. So does that mean did we have to go through the slavery in order to get the Ten Commandments? Why couldn't we just skip the middle step and just say, God's going to say, I'll take you out to Egypt and take you to the desert, and we'll do a quick 10 Commandments and we'll get back to living our lives, But
they accepted they accepted the Torah without actually seeing it.
Yeah.
Which is,
I'm sure Jacob and his children would have done the same. Yeah.
As a people, we probably had to learn first what's supposed to be submitted by something and by a human first before actually accepting to be submitted to God, which is something that is beyond our comprehension.
Great. Okay, so this is the beginning of the answer. This is the beginning of the answer, is that there's something that slavery does to a person and a group of people that was necessary for the creation of the Jewish people. And so now let's see what that is with this answer in mind. Okay? The exile was certainly a means for us to draw near to God. And this is what it is meant by originally our ancestors were idol worshippers. So, and Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. So there is a Mishnah, an oral teaching in the Talmud, that says that the structure of the Seder has to be beginning with disgrace and ending with praise. We have to begin with the disgrace of the Jewish people and then end up on a high. Right? It's every good story, but this is a very essential piece of the structure of the Seder. There's actually a dispute amongst Rav and Shmuel, two of the sages of the Talmud, about what disgrace we're talking about. One person says the original disgrace is that Abraham was a descendant of idolaters, and that's why we actually start talking about our ancestors were idol worshippers, to fulfill that opinion. But the other opinion is obviously the disgrace of the Jewish people in slavery. But whether or not, now it sounds like the Sfas Emes is not saying, well, that's just in order to contrast the redemption to the slavery. He's saying, no. That part of the story is also an important part of the story. So let's see what it is. For all of this was God's kindness. All of this disgrace at the beginning of our national origin is part of the kindness of God, as it says, your wonders and thoughts toward us are toward us. Okay, let's see what this means. For without this, and these are the key words, we would not be able to escape pitfalls. They translate it, no, that's not the right translation. See how ChatGPT, I just talked it up too much. The word here is not pitfall. The word in Hebrew is geut, geus, coming from like the word gava. What does that word mean? That word means pride, or in another context it means ego. What slavery really does is it saves us from pride and ego. Just as we find many times the wonders of God in this way, so that a person can receive good without nullifying it through the foot of pride. Oh boy. ChatGPT, you're letting me down here. Okay, so the more appropriate translation would be, as we see many times the wonders of God through this means, so that a person can receive something good, and that it would not be nullified, that it would not be undone through some act of pride. So normally what happens is that when a person is promoted or elevated to a higher position, their undoing is the fact that they think that they deserve it, the fact that they now start getting a big head. You know, it's amazing. We judge politicians and people in positions of power very harshly. I think we don't fully understand the temptation of what happens to a person when they get into that position of power. Like, if that many people succumb to it, then you have to imagine that that the odds are you would too. I remember there was some politician in New York City many years ago. There was a big scandal with, like, whatever he visited. He had some run-in with paying for illicit services for women, and things that he did to these women showed that it was not just his like. You know, he wasn't just like out for some sex. And it's like, what's wrong with you? You've ruined your whole career. Like, everything you've built up for your whole life, you did it for that. And the answer is like, once you've got power, you want more power, and you want to demonstrate that power, and you want to see who you can be powerful over in many other ways. That's just the way that power works. So it's not a small thing that when the Jewish people when God wants to elevate the Jewish people and give them something great like the Ten Commandments, right, or whatever it is, we first need to go through something that is deeply, deeply humbling. Deeply humbling. And so that's what he seems to be saying. It seems that all the evils in the world are for this purpose, to humble a person. Now that's a big statement. I don't know if I could say it, but the Sfas Emes says it. The Sfas Emes says it. He says that everything that happens to us in this world, on a personal level, meaning in terms of our own individual growth and who we are as people, because we often forget that we measure progress through how society functions and look at the technological advances of humankind, but you cannot measure progress except through how developed the human beings are in a particular culture or society. Which is why I think that when we rely too much on technology, then it's almost a step backwards, because we become weaker as people, right? There's too many stories to tell, but I'm not even sure I would know how to navigate with a map, like a paper map. I don't know. Did anyone here think they could do it? You could do it? You learned how to do it? Good for you, right? You've unhooked yourself from the necessities of being totally dependent. Yeah, but I just, to think of another animated film, I think of that movie WALL-E, where these people are living in their like comfort pods while they're waiting for Earth to regenerate, and they have like the screen and like the straw that's like hooked up to their face, so that they really literally have to do nothing. So I think that technological advance does not always necessitate progress. Progress is how great are the people inside of the society. And one of the things that defines a great person is somebody who has nullified their ego, somebody who realizes that they are not the end and end all and be all of all of humanity, and they don't deserve everything that they have. How many teenagers does it take to screw in a light bulb? One. They stand there, and the universe just revolves around them.
That's pretty good. Pretty good.
So we want to try to subvert that, and it seems like what the Sfas Emes is saying is that really the only way that this can happen is through a very, very traumatic event. Something like slavery, hundreds of years of slavery. That seems to be so necessary that it has to be sunk into our bones, that at a certain level we are totally and utterly subjugated to something outside of ourselves. So that by the time we are ready to receive that higher level of distinction, we realize that it's only there and we only deserve it because of the fact that we are attached to something greater than ourselves, outside of ourselves. And the moment we lose sight of that, that's the moment when we get another smack again in history. Yes?
So I was thinking that even though the scholars disagree, I think it's down to like how human brain like operates, in the sense that we're very quick to kind of judge like an event or anyone in general with black or white thinking, when like often these concepts of which are complete opposites, like exile and suffering and freedom, we see them as opposites when actually there's like a dual nature to them and they can both coexist. And back then there was obviously not just suffering. I'm sure that there were lots of lessons that people were learning, and there was happiness and joy and families and like people having children. So I think that there was, even though a lot of suffering, there was a lot of positive emotions as well.
Yeah, well taken. Point well taken. Yeah, I mean, it's you are absolutely right. Now, it's incredibly difficult for a human being to figure this out, because, first of all, we live in a dualistic reality, right? We live in hot and cold and black and white, and we also live in a world where there is real good and real evil. And so when we speak about something like this, we can fall into the pitfall of saying, well, there is no good and evil. And that's not true. At least as we experience it down here, we cannot say that good is evil and evil is good, because then we can justify doing evil things for the sake of good, and it's very clear that we're not allowed to do that. However, over time, time reveals the things that we once thought were tragedies end up becoming the greatest source of good that we could imagine. And so, looking back, we're able to say that that was ultimately for our good. Now, you're right, though, that what we're trying to do on Pesach is actually reconcile these two opposites. The Maharal says that that's one of the reasons why we make a sandwich out of matzah and maror and the korban Pesach that we don't have anymore. But maror is bitter and it's horrible, and that's the thing that represents our slavery. And matzah is freedom. And so to put those two things together and eat them is really demonstrating exactly that the two things are intertwined with each other. Now, just to take us home here. Now, how do we put this together? Originally, we said that there seems to be this big debate. Does matzah represent freedom, or does it represent slavery? So what's the answer?
I think both.
How is it both?
Because if you look at it from one angle, they didn't have time to let the matzah turn into bread. They were rushed, like they were being pushed out of the country. So they were escaping, so you could see it as freedom, but it can also represent suffering, because if they were never put in that place in the first place, they would have never had to make matzah, they would have always made bread. Good, okay. Both of those are true. But now, how does the suffering represent the freedom? The two are the same. How are they the same thing? Based on what we've seen so far. Without suffering, there is no freedom, in a sense.
Yes, that's the kind of the contrast thing. Without evil, there's no good.
think that the whole reason that they were in Egypt in the first place was due to famine, due to a lack of food. And that's they ended up in Egypt in the first place.
Okay.
But to have this matzah, to have this food, as they're leaving, they've gone from having no food to having this thing called matzah, which is food.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of a journey from famine to food,
Yes.
representing the coming into Egypt and the exiting of Egypt.
I'll come back to matzah in a second, but based on everything that we've just seen, how does the slavery and the freedom, how are the two really bound up with each other? Yeah, Kane.
Because the suffering breaks you down until you have nothing left to be proud about, and that frees you from your ego.
Bingo. Bingo. The slavery, the hardship, the suffering, that's all the nullification of the ego. And guess what freedom is? Freedom is freedom from the ego. Freedom is freedom from the attachment to this false concept of self that we think we are, that we build up in our minds. We say, oh, I'm great because I do this, and I'm done that, and I have this, and I have that. And it's like when you have nothing and when you are nothing, you realize what you really are, which is something, by the way. You're not a nothing. But it's something much, much, much deeper than what you previously thought you were. And indeed, what it is if we'll read the last sentence here, this is what you really are. And since we were slaves to Pharaoh and went out from there to be servants of God, and this is exactly what you were saying. I forgot your name. Sam. This is exactly what you were saying. Since we were slaves to Pharaoh, went out from there to be servants of God, we accepted his kingship completely. Once we understood what it means to be a nobody, to be completely subject to the will and whim of another, we were able to immediately transfer that to being the subject to the will and whim of the greatest source of reality in the universe. In other words, when I break down the ego sufficiently, what I realize is that my deepest self is really just an expression of the highest thing that could possibly exist. So the metaphor that I use to think about this is, if you can imagine somebody is like painting, right? Painting a nice painting on a window. And someone else comes along and says, oh, that's a nice painting. And he says, thank you. He says, but what's out the window? He's like, I don't know. He says, well, do you mind? And he starts rubbing away at the painting. And the guy's like, what are you doing? That's my painting. I painted that. It's such a beautiful... And as he starts to rub away the painting, he realizes that outside of the window is the most glamorous panoramic view of the Swiss Alps that you've ever seen in your life. And it's like, why would you ever paint over that? So here we are building up our sense of self. It's like this nice painting that we've made, and then all of a sudden it's just like, if you just kind of rub a little bit away, you start to realize that there is something so immensely beautiful that's just waiting right behind that you could be expressing if you just got out of your own way.
Do you know why God gave us an ego?
You tell me. Do you have an answer? So we spoke about it last week when we spoke about evil and how to use evil for good. And the answer is that you need the slightest hint of ego. The slightest hint of ego. Without any ego, you cease to exist. You're like, I'm merely an ant in a colony, right? Maybe not even. So if you have no ego, then you actually have no desire or will to accomplish or do anything. All you are there is just to rejoin the void. So you need the slightest sense of independence such that you feel the motivation to actually do something in the world. That's the correct use of ego. But the other answer is simply that God gives us a very healthy ego, especially when we're children, in order to learn how to kind of break it open and wash away the paint. And that's actually a very healthy and good process for us, is to learn how to overcome that sense of self, that ego. And that's exactly what happened in Egypt. That's exactly what took place, is this incredible process of breaking something down just enough so that you reveal something on the inside. By the way, 1 second, Nick, that is the deeper idea of why we ask questions on Pesach, is because asking a question is actually a humbling of the self. It means you don't know. It means you don't know. That's what it means to ask a question. And the answer is what you get when you've sufficiently admitted your humility. And the Talmud says that that it used to be the custom back then that when children asked questions, the parents would give them a nut. Now, what's the symbolism of the nut? You got to crack open the shell in order to get to the nut. That's exactly what a question and an answer is. That's exactly what the slavery and the freedom was. This whole thing is the breaking open of the outer, coarser layer in order to reveal the inner, deeper layer. You see how deep this goes. There's just so many different symbols about this, but this is what the entire night is for. And so this matzah, this pure, flat bread with no added anything that's beyond time, nothing dragging it down, that's what slavery does to a person. It flattens you down and takes away all the extra stuff. The language of the Torah is, it was the furnace. It was the, how do we translate a Korah Barzel? The iron crucible, right? The iron crucible. What happens is you take all this ore that has lots of impurities in it, and you shove it through this extremely hot fire, and it burns off all of the impurities until you come out on the other side perfect, shiny, and simple. And that's exactly what matzah represents. You're darn right it was the food that we ate in Egypt, and you're darn right it was the food we ate as we got out of Egypt. Because the very thing that they used to break us down and turn us into slaves, we now carry that as the symbol of our freedom. How poetically beautiful is that? See, the Sfas Emes, good stuff. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Alternative explanation. Can you potentially say that Mitzrayim sort of represents the boundaries of this world? Meaning that if you stay in Mitzrayim sort of can be seen as an analogy of this world being always embedded in the idea of slavery. So if you think about, for example, by your phone, right? Everything else in this world can be enslaving. Just by leaving Mitzrayim and by relying on something that's limitless, can you get rid of those sort of the forces that push you towards slavery?
Well said, yes. And of course the word Mitzrayim means boundaries. Did you know that?
No.
Really? So that's awesome. A Meitzar is a boundary. So Mitzrayim, the essence of Mitzrayim was boundaries. And you'll run into a boundary anytime you subjugate yourself to something that is finite, right?
And that's the special, that's why it's so special, because you're bounded by something that's Ein Sof, without boundaries.
That's right.
So you yourself are without boundaries.
That's right. And that's the deeper understanding of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, don't be like the servant who serves the master in order for the reward, to get the reward. Rather be like the servant that serves the master not to receive the reward. The reason why is because if you're serving the king to receive the reward, then you're really a slave to the reward. And the reward is finite. You spend it and you'll use it up and you're done. But if you say, I'm not doing this to the reward, then what are you really a slave to? You're a slave to something that which is limitless. And there's a beautiful teaching in the Talmud. Eved lemelech doma lemelech. A servant to the king is like a king, because you're merely an extension of the king. That's the only way you can be free. Okay, we're getting too deep, but I think you guys get the picture. So this is step one of our understanding of freedom. If you choose to continue with me on this magical carpet ride, I'll see you next week for step two.